What's up guys, welcome back. We've got another tutorial and this time we're going into depth on the tone curves and how we use them, why we use them, and how do we get a great looking image like this one that we'll be using these tone curves. So this image has been sent in and I'll be putting all of his links down in the description guys. Go give him a follow down there. You can also check out his YouTube, I'll link that up, and you can see he's got some really great work. So he's using about 50 millimeters most of the time by the looks, or 35. And yeah, we're going to be working with this one right here. Really smooth, bit of a fade there. So the curves will play a really big role in this one. So yeah, links down in the description guys. Go give him a follow. Really great work. And let's get into it. Here's our raw unedited image and the edited one from his Instagram. So before I go on and explain the curves, we have to do the rest of the edit. So we'll start with these ones up here. Let's increase the contrast a bit. Now this image has quite a bit of flatness to it. So I'm going to drop the highlights, but then bring up the whites a bit for the very bright bits. We want them to pop a bit through the flatness, so white's quite a bit higher than the highlights. Let's drop the exposure though. Shadows come right up. So you just want to, when you're moving the shadows, you want to look in areas such as around here. You just want to sort of match up how much detail you can see down there. But you don't want to worry about it too much right now, because usually you go back and forth from the curves and up here. So I'll just do that. I'll up the blacks a bit. And for this one, I'm going to really bring up the dehaze to really bring out the sort of the highlights and the shadows. So dehaze, I'm not sure exactly what it does, but it sort of gives the appearance of putting contrast in between the shadows and highlights. So it sort of leaves the really dark blacks and the really bright whites alone. So you get a nice amount of contrast. Now we'll go on to curves now. And so if we look at the histogram here and we go over to his image, you can see the blacks are a wee way away from the blacks, so that's a fade. And then it's the same in the highlights. So we've got a slightly flat looking image. So go back to ours. So our one is almost touching the blacks. That means our blacks are almost true black and our whites are almost blown out. So if I just lift this up, you can see what happens there, and I lift this down, you get something like that. So it's already a little closer, but we'll come back to this curve and I'll do the RGB colors first. So I'll do the curves and then I'll explain what I've done. Okay, so that's the tone curves done, and I just had to bring down the saturation of the yellows because they were a little too saturated there. And then I just took down a little bit of vibrance and saturation there. So vibrance kind of affects the pop to the image. So when you're going for a real flat looking image, you sort of want to take away the pop of the colors. And okay, I'll go over what I did in the curves. So to get this fade here, I brought them up a bit. And the reason I had to bring it up even higher is because when you add in contrast with these curves, so if you do an S curve like this, you're adding in contrast as well as the colors. So if I go this way, I'm adding in red and taking out the contrast. And then you're taking away red and you are adding in contrast. So these red, green and blue channels do the same as the RGB, but the RGB moves all the colors at once. And if you know anything about color theory, you can make up any color with the red, green and blue channels. So if you're moving them all at once, you're got the same colors. So this one's just for brightness and contrast and achieving a fade, and controlling the midtones for the brightness. And then these ones are what you use for a color pop. So for here, for instance, or in the midtones, we have added in these colors. So in the highlights, we added in a bit of a red, and the general rule is just do an S curve for them. And what I've found is if you want a vibrant looking image, you want slightly more tones into the midtones and highlights. So you get curves that start to look like this for very vibrant looking images. And then I've noticed for very rich looking images, the shadows are very low. So we've got pretty rich colors here. So like around her cheek and all that, it's getting pretty rich in the tones. So that's from bringing down the red, green and blue channels all about the same. So what you want to do is just do an S curve and then try to match up all the colors as you go. So for instance, you'll start off with just one curve and it will look all red, and then you'll match up the green, and then say you'll probably finish with the blue, and then you'll have something like this, and you'll see that there's too much blue in the shadows, and you'll move it down, taking blue out of the shadows, and you're left with much less blue in the shadows. So, and the reason why if you take blue out you get this gold color is because when you take blue out, it's kind of the same as adding more green or adding more red. Like a lot of people ask how to achieve the matte looking look. How do you get the matte look? So the real like smooth, flat look. And this is sort of how you get it. You get the fade going. You still have pretty dark blacks. And then you can do some denoising, which will also give you a really smooth looking image. So if you do that, takes out the digital look. So lifting the blacks does that as well. So if you look at photos, I've got some photos of Do You Travel, and you can see the fade in effect here. So for this image, the fade will be somewhere up there, and then it's very evident in a lot of their photos, very faded. I picked out ones that are extra faded, so you can see if you look at the histogram, not much fade in the highlights, still keeping it pretty high, but then there's a lot of fade in the blacks, and not too often people put fades in the highlights. It's much more common in the blacks. Okay, so and then here's a tutorial I did on yarn. So I did a previous tutorial on them, And you can see this is what the curves look like here. We've got a really nice fade to this image, really soft looking image. And if I just take away the tone curve, you can see it goes much more harsh. And then there's that nice fade. I'll put a link to his Instagram down in the description. And then you've got other people where the curve looks really different. So I'll put an image up of Mitchell Mullins, for example. He uses really dark blacks, and his curves would look something like a lot closer to the blacks, bringing down the shadows, something like that. Okay, coming back to our image. Okay, so I know a lot of people struggle with the curves, and what I've thought about doing is adding in a lot of curves for you guys to use in my preset pack. Curve presets, and they're just curves. They're only changing the curves. So you can just go through and pick which ones you like. So they do change hue, saturation, and luminance. I don't know if there's a way around that, but otherwise it will keep all your settings the same, and then you can just go through and see which curves you've got. So we've got these curves, and it's different for each of these channels. These are all my favorite curves that work great across all images. And then you just got different types for more contrast. Down the bottom here, we've got the real flat look going, and then you just got a slight in the RGBs. And the awesome thing is apply your favorite preset and then go through and see what it looks like with different curves, or even just start off with one of these curves and then start your edit from there, because it can be quite tricky to like perfectly say balance your photo to get the same tones across the blue, red and green channel, because people can't really, until they've learned and practiced a lot, they won't be able to see that their shadows have a little bit too much blue, or the midtones have a little bit too much green. So it takes quite a bit of practice to learn that. So if we just hit Command Z, we can undo all our changes to get back to where we were. So that's in my preset pack. So you guys check that out if you're liking these tutorials, and then you'll have access to all those tone curves all by themselves, and you can mix and match how you want. So that's the tone curves, and as you can see, our histogram is very similar to this histogram now. So this is his image and my image, and if we reset this image, you can see how blacks are nowhere near as faded, and our whites are also brought down a bit, and it sort of helps give that matte looking look a lot of people are after, and it's quite confusing how to get sometimes. So and then that's about all I can think for the curves right now. So I'll move on with editing the rest of this image, and then I might think of some more things to tell you about the curves. Okay, so I just want to tweak a few of these. Let's bring the highlights down. And this is really small changes. And also with the curves, a lot of people will say, why bring up the blacks over here? Why not bring the blacks up in the tone tools here? And it's because it affects the image differently. Lifting the blacks here is going to add a fade. Okay, and then lifting the blacks over here, it really brings out the detail. So say if we didn't have such a flat looking image, our blacks might be that dark. And then if you want to fade, see how you can't see the detail down there? It's just a fade. But if we lift the blacks up here, you can actually see what's in there now. So that's sort of how I think about it. I think when I'm trying to match up two shots, I'm thinking, how much of this can I see? Can I just see that piece of hair there? And then is that fade there? And then you sort of figure it out from there, how far up the blacks should be to how bright the shadows or blacks should be. So you can see there's a bit of a flatness. You can't just see straight through those blacks. So black's down a bit, black point up here, and same goes with the highlights. So you can see a bit of a flatness to this. This is probably the brightest spot of the image right here, and you can see you can't really see the detail of the sheet there. So I'll show you what happens if I see how it just fades away. But if I brought down the whites up here, you can see it. And then if I bring down the whites here, you can't see it. So fix the image differently. Just start off, this is a fade one. The most common curve you want is just an S curve like this. And that's just going to add in a little bit of contrast, but we're going for a flat faded sort of look, so it's completely different. So that's not, we've got too much contrast if we do that curve. So we need such a real flat. We need to bring our blacks up a lot. We need to bring down our highlights and our whites, because we got a pretty strong S curve for each of these, the red, green, and blue channels. And the reason the highlights are up is because we want a little bit of color introduced into the midtones, but we don't want too much. We still want to keep that flat look. If I went up on each of these, you can see that we've got too much contrast again. And then the colors are too rich in the highlights. You can see how saturated those whites, that's the brightest areas, they're becoming very saturated, and that's because we're adding in brightness as well as saturation when we do that. Okay, and then you just want to white balance it, so practice so you don't end up with images like that. We think it looks good, but there's way too much red in the highlights, and that just comes with practice. And then you might think it's in the shadows, but really in the midtones, so it's hard to pick. Is it the shadows with the problem? Is it the midtones with the problem? So just got to play with that. So yeah, general rule: do an S curve and then don't use this curve for it. Use these. Like when I go to edit an image, it's almost guaranteed they've got an S curve going on. Pretty much all of my tutorials I'm using the S curves, and if I'm not, the creator probably is. So it's pretty much necessary for all the images. And then you don't want to do the S curve here, because this is where you control your fade. So if you want a really faded image, you got to bring it up, but then you get a real flat looking image. So if I get rid of red, green, and blue, now we've got a real flat looking image. We've got no color pop, but we've got flat looking image. Get rid of that. That's what we started with. Fade. So that's with the blues. So if I show you now, so the reason we have really warm shadows is because we've pulled blues out of those shadows. Then the reason we have pretty cool highlights is because we've got a tiny bit of blue in those highlights there. And then that's when we've got green. So green and purple. It's the same with tint. They're opposites up here. So pulling green out is adding purple in. A lot like up here. Adding green in, adding purple in. So they're opposites. And then the opposite of red is this bluey green. Okay, we'll keep going back. We'll get back to where we were. Okay. Right, and then you just got so much control to create your own style. You get a little bit of a pop to the highlights there if you do it to each. I see sometimes people like leave a little bit of blue out of the whites there, and then that just gives a nice yellow to the brightest areas. I see that sometimes. And then yeah, rich colors quite often pull down the shadows a lot, bit of increase to the middle, and then the highlights sometimes only just. Okay. And yeah, and if we didn't have as strong an S-curve here, say we just had half as strong an S-curve, like we've brought down those shadows quite a bit. Well, let's try it. If I went just a tiny S-curve in all of these. I would need a much stronger S-curve in this one to make it look normal. And this is how you most commonly put in an S-curve. But then as you can see, we've edited the rest of the image for a flat image, so then take out contrast there. And yeah, that's probably bring up the whites as well. That's the most common way when you're not going for a flat look. We are. Okay, we're back to where we were. I'm gonna finish editing this image. I'll get it looking over like his. So I think we've done pretty much everything. We just gotta smooth out the skin. So I've got a brush here and I've already placed it, so it's affecting pretty much just all her skin. I'll turn that off now. And I'll just drop the clarity by 100, and I'd normally keep it about there and wouldn't go any further. I'd sometimes only go 40 or 50, but this image seems to have quite a bit of it. And you can't go any further than 100, so what I'll do is duplicate, and then that just places another one right back on top of that. And now her skin just looks a little too smooth. It just doesn't quite look natural. So if we come down, let's go to grain. I'm going to put in a lot of grain, and then that looks like too much grain. So we've got to drop the size. The size isn't too bad. Got to drop the roughness a lot. You can see that really gets rid of a lot of that. And then what that does, it just adds in a bit of texture to the skin. So it almost simulates pores in the skin, and it just looks more natural, yet you still get that real nice smoothing of the dropping the clarity in the skin. So that's a wee tip there. I'll increase the size because it looks a little too small. Okay, drop it a bit. I think that looks good. Right, let's come back up. Might add a tiny bit of brightness to the skin tones, so a tiny bit of luminance to the oranges, just to give a little bit of a pop to her. I'm going to drop the saturation, some of these blues, maybe it doesn't need to be done. I'll drop them a bit. Aquas, not many aquas. I thought some aquas might be in the white sheets. Not really. So we've pretty much done our whole image just with the tone curves here. And now our image looks a little soft, so let's chuck up the sharpening quite a bit. When you really drop the clarity, sometimes you want to bring up the sharpening. And then we've already done the denoise, and that just gives a slightly smoother image. sort of adds to the matte look, getting rid of the digital look to your images. You can lose a bit of sharpening doing it, but I think sometimes it's well worth it. Okay, let's go back up. I think we're about done. I think we're all good up here. Let's drop blacks a touch, shadows a touch. Let's drop the highlights. You can see how we kind of lose. We want to see the shadows in these sheets and such. So I think dropping the highlights, for whatever reason, really affects that. So I'm going to do that. Got a real flat looking image. So I'll bring the highlights down, and then we want the whites up, because if you got the highlights and whites down at the same time, you get an extremely flat looking image. Okay, let's go back down. I think we're sussed with our tone curves. No split toning. Okay, I just got another brush. What I want to do is just increase the highlight. So I'll show you. I've already placed the brush. This is where it's affecting chin, nose, a little bit of the forehead. And I just want to brighten the brighter areas just a bit, especially on her face, because that's where the center focal point of the image is. A little bit of highlights. A bit of whites. And we got such a flat looking image, and then her face is the focal point. So if we just bring up the highlights and the whites a little on her face, it makes a really big difference to the pop and focusing your eye to the subject. And okay, for this image I had already done the retouching, so that's the spot removal. I won't show you guys all of it, but if you don't know how it works, you click this tool here, you click on a bit you want to remove. So say this bit right here. So what you do, click on it, and it will automatically pick another spot to replace over it. And then if you don't like where it's automatically chosen, you can choose yourself. But I've already gone through and done that a lot. I want to leave some of them there. And then you choose the feathering, the opacity, the size of those. So I won't do all of them. I've already done them. So that's about it for this one, guys. I hope you guys understand the tone curves a bit more. So that's a flat look. S-curve is just what you want to do otherwise. We use the RGBs, so the red, green and blue channels, because we want to save this curve for the fade and control of the shadows and brightness. And we may as well use these for the colors, making your colors pop, making your colors deeper by changing the contrast of them down in the shadows. So you don't fully have to understand what it's doing, just know, add some S-curves, balance the colors, understand a little bit of color theory, like if you pull out greens, you're going to be left with purples, because purple is the opposite of green over here. So understand that, so then you can get a white balanced image. So you sort of got the same, almost the same colors as what's up there. So if you want to slightly redder shadows, I think we're pretty spot on. I think we don't need to shift anything. But I spent a lot of time trying to get the perfect amount of red in those shadows. And I think it's good about there. And then like you might want, see how we can get quite rich tones in the shadows right there. Could shift that a little. It's a bit too much, a bit obvious. But if we just did that real subtly, you might like the increase of tones in those shadows. And that's how you get those advanced looking styles like Sam Calder and that. You got to be using the curves to control where you want the colors to be in the shadows and such like that. Like, just for example, he has blues and reds in the shadows at the same time, and it's like, how do you do that? Well, like, I think I've got a tutorial on it, but like, what I did is I added blues in with the split toning, but then added reds in with the curves, and then you can kind of get them in there at the same time. It's kind of complicated, but okay. Okay. Might just leave it there, guys. Hope you like this one. I hope it was really helpful. And let me know what you thought down in the comments. If you like these tutorials, you like the look of the preset pack I create, check them out down in the description. Give him a follow, guys. I'll be putting all of his links down in the description. Got some pretty amazing portrait shots, so go give him a follow down there. And yeah, if you guys are into video editing, I do color grading. I've got a free color grading course with Luts. Just look down in the description. You can buy 1DX Mark II flat footage so you can practice with yourself. I've got a few images as well, raw images you guys can download and follow along. And comment, guys, down below who you want to see so I can go through the comments and reach out to them on Instagram. So it really helps me if you comment people, great creators, down in the description for me to go and try to get them to send in a photo. But that's about it, guys. Thanks for the supports. Thanks for all the comments you guys have been given. And I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.